May 3, 1945. Oberammergau, Bavaria. SS Obersturmbannführer Werner Keller stood in the mouth of a massive tunnel complex carved into the Bavarian Alps, watching American tanks roll up the mountain road. Behind him, stretching into the darkness for over half a mile, lay what Nazi propaganda had called the future of German warfare: 200 V-2 rockets, experimental jet engines, prototype guided missiles, chemical weapons, stockpiles, and filing cabinets containing technical specifications for weapons that Hitler had promised would turn the tide of war. Keller had spent 18 months overseeing this facility, codenamed DAX, coordinating the evacuation of Germany's most advanced weapons research from bombed factories across the Reich. Every prototype, every blueprint, every ounce of research that was supposed to guarantee German victory had been consolidated here in the final months. Now, as he prepared to surrender to the approaching Americans, Keller believed he held the keys to military technology that would astound his captors. What Keller didn't know, what none of the German scientists and officers at DAX could have imagined, was that the Americans rolling up that mountain road carried secrets that made German wonder weapons look like expensive toys. The proximity fuse that had revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare, cavity magnetron radar that could see through clouds and darkness, the Manhattan Project that had harnessed atomic power, a functional computer that could break any code, and most devastating of all, the industrial capacity to mass-produce any weapon they invented, while Germany struggled to build even their most promising prototypes. Over the next 3 weeks, as American technical intelligence teams catalogued the Bavarian vault's contents, German scientists would experience a revelation more crushing than military defeat. They had been racing to develop wonder weapons while their enemies had already deployed miracles. The story of Hitler's secret weapons programs and their discovery by Allied forces reveals one of World War II's most profound ironies. Germany invested billions of Reichsmarks and countless man-hours developing advanced weapons that rarely reached mass production. Meanwhile, the Allies developed practical weapons that won the war through superior engineering, better production methods, and scientific collaboration the Nazi system could never achieve. The contrast would become painfully clear when German and Allied scientists finally compared notes in the rubble of the Third Reich. To understand the shock awaiting German scientists in May 1945, one must first comprehend the scale of Nazi Germany's secret weapons programs and the desperate hope they represented. By 1943, as the tide of war turned decisively against Germany, Hitler and his inner circle increasingly placed faith in Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons that would reverse Germany's fortunes through technological supremacy. This wasn't mere propaganda. Germany possessed genuine scientific talent and had pioneered technologies that seemed decades ahead of their time. The question wasn't whether Germany could develop advanced weapons. The question was whether they could develop them fast enough, produce them in meaningful quantities, and whether they would actually work as promised. The V-2 rocket represented the most famous of Hitler's wonder weapons. Developed at Peenemünde under Werner von Braun, the V-2 was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. It could strike London from launch sites in Holland, traveling faster than sound and arriving without warning. From a technological standpoint, the V-2 was genuinely revolutionary. It pioneered rocket technology that would eventually put humans on the moon. But from a military standpoint, the V-2 was a catastrophic waste of resources. Germany produced approximately 6,000 V-2s during the war. Each cost as much as a fighter aircraft, but delivered only a 1-ton warhead with terrible accuracy. The entire V-2 program killed approximately 9,000 people, mostly civilians, in London and Antwerp. By comparison, more slave laborers died building the V-2s than were killed by them. The resources invested in the V-2 program could have produced 24,000 fighter aircraft that Germany desperately needed to defend against Allied bombing. The jet aircraft program represented another area where Germany achieved genuine technological breakthroughs that ultimately contributed little to victory. The Messerschmitt Me 262 was the world's first operational jet fighter, capable of speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour. When it worked properly and had fuel and a trained pilot, the Me-262 could outperform any Allied aircraft. Germany produced approximately 1,400 Me-262s, and they achieved a claimed kill ratio of roughly 5-to-1 against Allied aircraft. But the Me-262's development was plagued by Hitler's interference, production delays, inadequate pilot training, fuel shortages, and mechanical unreliability. The Jumo 004 jet engines required complete overhaul after just 10 hours of operation. Most Me-262s were destroyed on the ground by Allied bombing before they could fly combat missions. The jet program consumed resources desperately needed elsewhere while producing minimal strategic impact. The Reich's facility in the Bavarian mountains became the repository for these programs, and dozens more as Germany collapsed. Starting in late 1943, as Allied bombing intensified, the Nazi regime began evacuating critical research facilities underground. The Oberammergau complex represented the culmination of this effort. Over 18 months, thousands of slave laborers carved enormous chambers into the alpine rock. Railroad spurs were extended into the mountain to deliver heavy equipment. Ventilation systems, electric lighting, and sophisticated security measures transformed the tunnels into a subterranean city dedicated to weapons development. By April 1945, the complex housed not just weapons but the scientists, engineers, and technicians who had created them. It was meant to be the seed from which the Fourth Reich would emerge once Germany's temporary setback was overcome. Werner Keller had watched this evacuation with growing unease. A career SS officer with an engineering degree from Munich Technical University, Keller understood both the potential and the limitations of the weapons under his protection. The V2s stacked in Chamber 7 represented cutting-edge technology, but each required specialized fuel that Germany could barely produce. The Me-262 components in Chamber 3 were sophisticated, but without the infrastructure to assemble and maintain them, they were merely expensive scrap. The documents in Chamber 1 contained brilliant research, but research meant nothing without the industrial base to transform it into functional weapons. As Soviet forces advanced from the east and American forces from the west, Keller increasingly suspected that German wonder weapons represented hope without foundation, promises without delivery, technology without victory. The American technical intelligence teams that began arriving at Oberammergau on May 5, 1945, represented a different approach to weapons development. Operation Paperclip, the codename for recruiting German scientists, was already in motion. The Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee had compiled lists of German researchers whose expertise the Allies wanted to acquire, but more immediately, teams from the Army's Technical Intelligence Division needed to assess what technologies Germany had actually developed and whether any represented threats or opportunities for Allied military forces. Captain Robert Williams led the first team into the Dax complex, accompanied by specialists in rocketry, aeronautics, chemistry, and electronics. Williams later recorded his initial impressions in reports preserved at the National Archives. The Germans were clearly proud of what they had assembled. Obersturmbannführer Keller gave us a guided tour like a museum curator showing off prize exhibits. He explained each weapon system in detail, emphasizing how advanced German technology was compared to Allied weapons. He seemed to believe we would be astounded by what we found. His confidence was about to be shattered. The V-2 rockets drew immediate attention from the American specialists. Werner von Braun himself was captured near Oberammergau, and he eagerly explained the rocket's technical specifications to his captors. The Americans were genuinely impressed by the engineering achievement the V-2 represented. Liquid-fueled rocket engines, gyroscopic guidance systems, and supersonic flight were all cutting-edge technologies. Von Braun expected the Americans to beg for his expertise. What he didn't expect was what happened when Captain Williams casually mentioned Allied weapons development in response. The Americans had already developed something the Germans considered impossible. The proximity fuse, officially designated the VT fuse, was a miniaturized radar system built into anti-aircraft shells. When the shell came within lethal range of an aircraft, the fuse detected the proximity and detonated automatically. This eliminated the need for direct hits or precisely timed fuses. The technology had been so secret that the Allies initially refused to use proximity fuses over land, fearing the Germans would recover duds and copy the technology. By 1945, proximity fuses had revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare. A single shell with a proximity fuse was as effective as dozens with conventional fuses. The Germans had theorized about such a weapon but considered it technically impossible to produce. The idea of building a functioning radar system small enough and rugged enough to survive being fired from a gun seemed absurd. When Williams showed German scientists a captured proximity fuse, their reaction was documented by multiple observers. Von Braun examined it in silence for several minutes, then asked how many had been produced. Williams replied that production exceeded 100,000 units per month. The color drained from von Braun's face. He later admitted that the proximity fuse alone represented a technological achievement Germany couldn't match. The miniaturization, the mass production, the reliability required to make such a device practical all exceeded German capabilities. One American weapon, mass-produced and deployed, had accomplished more than Germany's entire V2 program. The radar revelation proved equally crushing to German confidence. Germany had developed radar independently and used it effectively for air defense. But German radar operated on longer wavelengths, limiting its precision and effectiveness. The British had developed the cavity magnetron, a device that generated short-wavelength microwaves, allowing far more precise radar. This technology gave Allied forces the ability to detect aircraft, ships, and even surfaced submarines with unprecedented accuracy. H-2S radar allowed Allied bombers to navigate and bomb through clouds and darkness. ASV radar allowed Allied aircraft to detect submarines on the surface at night. Fire control radar allowed Allied ships to target enemy vessels beyond visual range with devastating accuracy. The cavity magnetron technology was so advanced that when the British shared it with the Americans in 1940, American scientists initially thought the small copper device couldn't possibly work as claimed. It did work, and American mass production soon made sophisticated radar available across all Allied forces. By 1945, radar-equipped night fighters were devastating German aircraft. Radar-directed anti-aircraft guns were shooting down V-1 flying bombs with extraordinary efficiency. Naval radar was making surface warfare almost suicidal for German vessels. The entire electromagnetic spectrum had become an Allied advantage that German technology couldn't match. German scientists at Oberammergau learned of another Allied technological triumph that made their weapons research seem primitive. Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic digital computer, had been operational at Bletchley Park since 1944. Designed specifically to break the sophisticated Lorenz cipher used by German High Command, Colossus could perform calculations at speeds that would have required thousands of human mathematicians working around the clock. The Germans had developed the Enigma machine and believed their communications were unbreakable. They had no idea that Allied codebreakers had been reading their most secret messages since 1941. The intelligence advantage this provided influenced every major campaign of the war. When German cryptographers learned that their supposedly unbreakable codes had been comprehensively broken, the psychological impact was profound. Everything they had believed about communications security was wrong. Every operational plan, every strategic discussion, every tactical order had potentially been compromised. The Allies had been reading Germany's mail for years, while German intelligence had completely failed to detect it. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller, a signals officer captured at Oberammergau, later testified that learning about Allied code-breaking destroyed his faith in German technical superiority more completely than any weapon demonstration could have. But the ultimate revelation awaited German scientists, and it would dwarf all previous shocks. The Manhattan Project had successfully weaponized atomic energy. On August 6, 1945, 3 months after Oberammergau's capture, an American B-29 dropped a single atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The explosion released energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, destroying 4 square miles of the city and killing over 70,000 people instantly. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The war ended within a week. German scientists had been aware of atomic physics. Werner Heisenberg and other brilliant physicists had explored the possibility of atomic weapons. But Germany's atomic program never progressed beyond theoretical research and primitive reactor experiments. The Nazi regime's persecution of Jewish scientists had driven away many of the world's best physicists. The German program lacked the massive industrial infrastructure required for uranium enrichment or plutonium production. German scientists calculated that atomic weapons might be theoretically possible, but practically impossible given available resources. They were wrong. The Americans had invested $2 billion and employed over 130,000 people in a coordinated program that achieved what Germany considered impossible. When Werner Keller learned of Hiroshima in his prisoner of war camp, his reaction was recorded by American interrogators. He sat in silence for nearly an hour, then asked a single question. How? The interrogator explained the basic principles of uranium enrichment and plutonium production, the gaseous diffusion plants at Oak Ridge, the reactors at Hanford, the assembly facility at Los Alamos. Keller understood enough physics to grasp the implications. Germany had been playing with firecrackers while America built the sun. The comparison between German and Allied weapons development revealed fundamental differences in approach, resources, and philosophy. Germany pursued numerous advanced weapons programs simultaneously, spreading limited resources across dozens of projects. The Allies focused on fewer programs, concentrating resources to achieve practical results. Germany emphasized technical sophistication, often at the expense of producibility. The Allies emphasized weapons that could be mass-produced and deployed quickly. Germany compartmentalized research, limiting collaboration between programs. The Allies shared information across research teams, accelerating development through cross-pollination of ideas. The resource differential was staggering. Germany's entire wartime research and development budget totaled approximately 2 billion Reichsmarks. The Manhattan Project alone cost $2 billion, roughly equivalent to Germany's entire R&D spending. American industrial capacity allowed simultaneous pursuit of multiple expensive programs without sacrificing conventional weapons production. Germany had to choose between V-2s and fighter aircraft, between jet engines and tank production. The Americans built everything. The philosophical differences went deeper than resources. Allied weapons development prioritized practical effectiveness over technical elegance. The proximity fuse was mechanically crude by German standards, but it worked reliably in field conditions and could be mass-produced. The Sherman tank was technically inferior to German Panthers and Tigers, but it was reliable, easy to maintain, and produced in overwhelming numbers. The B-17 bomber was less sophisticated than German jet bombers under development, but it was available in thousands of units when Germany needed it defeated, not in prototypes that might arrive too late. German weapons development suffered from Hitler's interference and Nazi ideology. Hitler insisted the Me-262 be developed as a bomber rather than a fighter, delaying its deployment and negating its main advantage. Nazi racial ideology drove away Jewish scientists whose expertise could have been decisive. The chaotic Nazi bureaucracy created competing programs that duplicated effort and wasted resources. Albert Speer, as armaments minister, tried to rationalize weapons production, but faced constant interference from Hitler, Goering, and rival bureaucrats. The Oberammergau facility contained examples of German brilliance wasted through poor strategic choices. The Wasserfall surface-to-air missile was genuinely advanced, using radar guidance and supersonic flight to intercept bombers. But it required exotic fuels, sophisticated electronics, and complex manufacturing that Germany couldn't sustain. A few dozen were built. They had minimal impact. Meanwhile, the Allies defended against German air attacks using conventional anti-aircraft guns with proximity fuses, crude by comparison but devastatingly effective and available in unlimited quantities. The infrared night vision devices discovered at Oberammergau represented another example of advanced technology with limited impact. Germany had developed workable infrared scopes for tanks and rifles, allowing them to see and shoot in darkness. The technology was genuine and represented a significant achievement. But production numbers were tiny, distribution was limited to elite units, and the devices required batteries that were increasingly unavailable. Allied forces countered German night operations through different means: radar, searchlights, and coordinated artillery barrages. Superior logistics and numbers made sophisticated night vision equipment unnecessary for Allied forces. The guided missile programs discovered in the Bavarian vaults revealed German attempts to create precision weapons that could neutralize Allied numerical superiority. The Fritz X and HS-293 were radio-controlled glide bombs that achieved some success against Allied shipping. The X-4 air-to-air missile was designed to allow German fighters to attack bomber formations from beyond defensive gun range. The Rheintochter and Schmetterling surface-to-air missiles were meant to defend German cities against Allied bombers. All represented genuine technological innovation. None were produced in quantities sufficient to affect the war's outcome. American specialists examining these weapons recognized their sophistication. Several programs were years ahead of comparable Allied research, but sophistication without production meant nothing. Germany built approximately 1,400 Fritz X glide bombs. They sank several Allied ships. Meanwhile, American factories produced millions of conventional bombs that destroyed German industry. The arithmetic of war favored mass production over technical elegance. Chemical weapons stockpiles at Oberammergau represented one area where Germany maintained clear superiority that fortunately was never employed. German chemists had developed nerve agents, tabun and sarin, that were far more lethal than any chemical weapon in Allied arsenals. Germany produced thousands of tons of these agents and weaponized them in artillery shells and bombs. Hitler refrained from using them, partly from fear of Allied retaliation and partly because German military effectiveness depended on mobility that chemical warfare would hinder. The discovery of these stockpiles alarmed Allied investigators. Had Germany used nerve agents, even late in the war, casualties would have been catastrophic. German chemical superiority was real, but strategic considerations prevented its employment. The interrogation of German scientists at Oberammergau and other facilities revealed a pattern of brilliant individuals working in a fundamentally flawed system. Many German scientists were world-class researchers who made genuine contributions to human knowledge, but they worked in an environment that hindered rather than helped their efforts. Competing bureaucracies fought over resources and jurisdiction. Ideological requirements distorted research priorities. Fear of punishment discouraged honest reporting of problems or delays. The Nazi system selected for loyalty over competence in leadership positions. Scientists who questioned decisions or suggested alternative approaches risked being labeled defeatist. Allied scientists worked in a different environment. The Allied system was far from perfect, but it generally prioritized competence and results over ideological purity. Scientists could disagree with each other and with military leadership without fear of execution. Resources were allocated based on likelihood of success rather than political considerations. Information was shared between American and British research teams, multiplying effectiveness. The contrast in organizational culture proved as decisive as the contrast in industrial resources. Werner von Braun epitomized the German scientist who thrived under the Allies after struggling under Nazi constraints. In Germany, he had to navigate SS politics, compete for resources with rival programs, and work under the constant threat that his project would be cancelled or he would be arrested for insufficient enthusiasm. Under American sponsorship, he received nearly unlimited resources, freedom to recruit the best talent regardless of politics, and support from a system focused on results rather than ideology. Von Braun's German V-2 killed thousands while consuming enormous resources. His American Saturn V put humans on the moon. The man was the same. The system made all the difference. The paperclip operation that recruited German scientists generated controversy, both during and after the war. Many Germans brought to America had been Nazi Party members, some had used slave labor, and a few had participated in war crimes. The decision to employ them was pragmatic rather than moral. The Cold War was beginning, and American military planners wanted German expertise denied to the Soviets. The Soviets were conducting similar recruitment in their occupation zone. Neither side could afford to let the other monopolize German scientific talent. But the German scientists recruited through paperclip discovered that their expertise was less decisive than they had believed. Von Braun and his rocket team certainly contributed to American missile development, but American industry, American organization, and American resources transformed German theoretical knowledge into practical weapons. The V-2 had been a technological marvel that accomplished little militarily. The American missiles derived from V-2 technology were backed by industrial capacity and organizational competence that made them strategically significant. The psychological impact on German scientists of encountering Allied technological superiority was profound and lasting. These men had believed they were the world's elite, advancing the frontiers of human knowledge. They discovered they had been working in isolation, pursuing dead ends while their enemies achieved breakthroughs they had considered impossible. The proximity fuse alone demonstrated that Allied scientists had solved miniaturization problems German researchers thought unsolvable. Cavity magnetron radar showed Allied physics was more advanced than German understanding suggested. The atomic bomb proved Allied industrial coordination exceeded German capabilities by orders of magnitude. Oberammergau's fall in May 1945 marked more than the capture of weapons and technology. It represented the collapse of Nazi Germany's last hope that wonder weapons would reverse their fortunes. Hitler had promised that secret weapons would bring victory even as Allied armies closed in from all directions. The V-2 would force Britain to surrender. The Me-262 would drive Allied bombers from German skies. New U-boats would strangle Allied shipping. Atomic research would produce super weapons that would make conventional forces obsolete. None of these promises materialized in time or scale to affect the war's outcome. The weapons discovered in the Bavarian mountain vault told a story of squandered potential and misallocated resources. Germany possessed brilliant scientists, innovative engineers, and advanced industrial capabilities. But the Nazi system wasted these advantages through poor strategic choices, ideological constraints, and organizational dysfunction. Resources poured into V-2 production could have built thousands of conventional fighters that might have made Allied bombing campaigns prohibitively expensive. Development efforts scattered across dozens of advanced weapons programs could have been concentrated on practical systems producible in decisive quantities. Meanwhile, the Allies demonstrated that technological innovation combined with industrial production and organizational competence created overwhelming military advantage. The proximity fuse combined innovative electronics with mass production. Radar combined physics breakthroughs with systematic deployment across all forces. The atomic bomb combined theoretical physics with the largest industrial project in human history. Code breaking combined mathematical genius with early computers and organizational systems to process vast amounts of intelligence. Every Allied technological triumph reflected not just scientific brilliance, but systematic execution at scale. The final irony of Hitler's secret weapons was that Germany's most effective weapons were often the simplest and most conventional. The 88mm anti-aircraft gun, adapted for anti-tank use, was devastating in combat and relatively easy to produce. The MG-42 machine gun was reliable, lethal, and manufacturable with available resources. The Panther tank, when it worked, was highly effective and represented a reasonable balance between capability and producibility. These conventional weapons achieved more than exotic wonder weapons. But Nazi propaganda and Hitler's desperation increasingly emphasized the fantasy weapons that would change everything rather than the practical systems that might have prolonged resistance. By war's end, over 70,000 tons of documents were captured from German research facilities. American and British teams spent years analyzing this material, identifying useful technologies, and determining which German research led to dead ends. Much of the advanced weapons research proved impractical or based on flawed assumptions. Some technologies, particularly in rocketry and aerodynamics, provided valuable foundations for post-war development. But the overwhelming lesson was that German scientific achievement had been undermined by the system in which it operated. The scientists working in the Bavarian mountain facility had believed they were Germany's hope for victory. They had genuinely advanced technologies in numerous fields, but advancement without production, sophistication without reliability, and innovation without strategic focus produced expensive failures rather than war-winning weapons. The Americans who documented their work recognized both the achievement and the waste. German scientists had run a race against time and lost. Allied scientists had run a different race, focused on practical weapons deployable before the war ended, and won decisively. Werner Keller spent 2 years in prisoner of war camps before being released to return to Germany. He never spoke publicly about his time at Oberammergau, but private letters preserved by his family reveal his thoughts. "We believed we were so advanced, so sophisticated in our research. We mocked American industrial methods as crude and unsophisticated. Then we discovered that our sophisticated weapons existed mostly on paper, while American crude weapons existed in millions of units. We had designed the future while they built the present won." The legacy of Hitler's secret weapons programs influenced Cold War military development profoundly. Both superpowers recruited German scientists and exploited German research. Missile programs, jet aircraft, submarines, and numerous other technologies built on German foundations, but the lesson of World War II was not lost. Technological sophistication mattered less than producibility, deployability, and reliability. The weapon that existed in quantity beat the superior weapon that existed in prototype. The simple weapon that worked beat the sophisticated weapon that didn't. The practical solution deployed today beat the perfect solution promised for tomorrow. Standing in the empty tunnels of Oberammergau today, visitors can still see remnants of the facility that was supposed to house Nazi Germany's military resurrection. The chambers that held V-2 rockets are empty. The storage areas for jet components are bare. The offices where scientists designed wonder weapons are silent. The Bavarian mountain vault that was meant to preserve Nazi Germany's technological superiority became instead a monument to the futility of advanced weapons without the industrial base organizational competence and strategic focus to employ them effectively. The secret weapons were uncovered, catalogued, analyzed, and ultimately revealed to be symbols of German desperation rather than instruments of German victory. The wonder weapons had failed to work wonders, and the 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years, defeated not primarily by superior Allied weapons, but by superior Allied production, organization, and strategic clarity. The secrets hidden in the mountain had promised victory, but delivered only evidence of how thoroughly Germany had lost the technological race it believed it was winning.